Sorry, Prabhuji.
Thank you. So yes, so we're going to go over Bhagavad Gita's overview and introduction. So if you go through Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, so first of all, there are 4 sections before we even get into the Bhagavad Gita. That's the setting the scene, there's a dedication, there's a preface, and there's an introduction. But before that, I just wanted to give you an overview of where does Bhagavad Gita fit into the whole Vedic corpus, and what are the different schools of thought around Vedic knowledge, and then where do we stand? When I say we, means Brahma, Madhva, Gaudiya, Vaishnavas. So I just wanted to give you that overview. It's not something that it's relevant for us, but I just wanted to give you this background because it kind of consolidates our information about Bhagavad Gita, where it's coming from, and the authenticity and validity of what we are hearing, what we are speaking, what we are listening, everything. That's why I just wanted to give you an overview. It doesn't, you don't have to memorize it, you don't have to remember it or anything, but it's just for information. I just wanted to go through this before. Sorry, just wanted to go through this. Okay. So what is the? Okay, you can see my full screen, right? Okay. So yes, so the entire Vedic knowledge that we have, that has been passed down to us through acharyas, through centuries, it's divided into 2 aspects. One is the Shruti, and the other aspect is a Smriti. Okay, so Shruti means what is to be heard, and it's coming directly from Krishna. So it's the Vedas are apaurushya. They're said to be apaurushya. Apaurushya means they're not spoken by a purush, by a human, by a living entity, by a human being. So they're called apaurushya. And so that's the Shruti. Okay. The Smriti is refers to that which is to be understood. It's to be understood, it's to be internalized, and then it's expressed by sages. For example, Srimad Bhagavatam is a Smriti because it was understood by, it was actually written by Vedavyas, spoken to his son Sukadeva Goswami, and then Sukadeva Goswami further spoke it to the sages, and then in the sages there was Sutta Goswami, and Sutta Goswami came and spoke to the other sages who were doing a 1,000-year yajna in Naimisharanya. So that's where the Srimad Bhagavatam stands. So just going through all of them, right? So the Shruti aspect. Just give me a second. Let me put my cursor. Yes, okay. So the Shruti, it contains the 4 Vedas. And the 4 Vedas are further divided into many sections. It's Upanishads, Aranyakas, Samhitas. And it also contains some Upavedas, Dhanurveda, Ayurveda. Then there are Angas, there are subsections of Vedas, or as arms of Vedas, that talk about some very specific details. Can everybody please mute themselves? There's some echo that I'm getting. Thank you. So Vedangas, they are of different aspects that I have listed there. And as I said, you don't have to remember this. I just wanted to give you an overview so that you understand where does Bhagavad Gita stand in the whole Vedic cosmos. Vedanga is divided into many sections. It talks about grammar, pronunciation, etymology, chandas. Chandas are the way the mantras to be recited. It also has a section on Jyotish, astronomy, time. So that's the Shruti aspect. Okay, and then if I notice in this corner, I put this here. So as we grow in our consciousness, so all these, so the beauty of Vedas, the beauty of this philosophy is that it has something for everyone in whichever phase of life one is. We might be too much dedicated and attracted to karma, to doing karmic activities. There is something for us, how we can elevate ourselves from that particular stage. We might be, very, very much interested in learning, in knowledge. So we are in a Gyan state. There is something for us there. But eventually, the goal of all the Vedas, all the Shruti Smriti is to take us to Bhakti, to devotion. But then, as I said, it's meant for people in all walks of life. Right? There is a provision for everybody. It's all encompassing. We don't leave anybody behind. That's the beauty of the Eastern philosophy coming from India. Then coming to the other aspect, Smriti. Smriti is divided into many sections. There is the more important ones are Purana and Itihas. Puranas are the Mahapuranas, which include the Srimad Bhagavatam, as I mentioned. Then there are 18 sub-Puranas, which are called Upapuranas. Itihas, as the name mentions, Itihas is history. It's philosophy trying to be spoken in a way of a story format. If somebody is not able to grasp the philosophical content, they can be presented the story format, and then they can pick up messages from there. So that's the essence of that's Itihas. So we have Ramayana and Mahabharata that come in Itihas, and in the Mahabharata section is where the Bhagavad Gita sits, right? And the beauty of Bhagavad Gita is that it's something spoken by God Himself. So it's a Shruti, but it's being put in the Smriti section. So it's Shruti in Smriti. So Shruti present in Smriti. That's the beauty of Bhagavad Gita. And why Vyasadeva did that? He wanted to, because when he was writing Mahabharata, it's pure story. So people could read the entire story but still not get the message out of it. So he had to put some philosophy somewhere in there. So he put that in there. And then he brought it in such a way that it could be read as a part of that story. That's the advantage. So we can get the message. Again, the concept being to tell us about bhakti in the easiest way possible, in the way possible that I can pick it up. So that's where Bhagavad Gita sits in there. Okay, so that's the first slide. Okay, so now coming to different schools that are in the Eastern philosophy. Okay. So when they say different schools, when I mean, so there are 6 different schools. So basically, people who believe in the Vedas called Astik. The people who don't believe in the Vedas are called Nastiks. The Astik is further divided into these 6 schools. You have Sankhya, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa, Yoga, Nyaya, Vedanta. You don't have to memorize all of them. They have different philosophies. But the basic concept is that in all these schools, that we have learned that we all are looking for freedom. We all aspire to be free, right? To be free from our external limitations. And why do we want that freedom? Is because we are looking for happiness. There is a reason why the Statue of Liberty appeals to millions. There are millions of people that come to see the Statue of Liberty every year, because it symbolizes the human aspiration for freedom. And the same aspiration, makes many countries celebrate their Independence Day. It's a defining moment in the national history of any country. So everybody is looking for that freedom because everybody understands that beyond that freedom lies our happiness. So what the Eastern philosophy has learned, and that is why it said that the Eastern world is much more advanced in spirituality than the Western world, because the Western world has looked externally for happiness. The Eastern world has looked internally for happiness. So whatever form of liberation, however desirable it may be, it doesn't free us from our fundamental limitation. The fundamental limitation that we all have is that we eventually are going to die. We're going to leave this body. That's mortality, right? So nothing limits our pursuit of happiness as much as death. And what subjects us to death, as the Eastern philosophy understood, was this material shell, the body that we have. It's temporary, it's destructible. Krishna talks about it that, okay, your soul never dies, you can never wet it, and you can never cut it, never burn it. But this matter, this body, is going to fade away eventually. So understanding that this body is the limitation that we have, most of the Eastern philosophies, they talked about disentangling from this matter of which this body is made. Now, even though we are seeking liberation from matter, right? That's the goal that most of the Eastern philosophies have, right? So all of them are, as you can call it, matter-centric. Right? For example, if you look at, so that's the basic concept, that we have to free ourselves from this matter. But now most of the Eastern philosophies, what they have done is that they have limited themselves to that aspect, right? So if I try to put in an analogy, consider that our life is on a number line. I am right now in the negative. But when I understand that I need to be liberated from this matter, and I eventually get that liberation, I come to a 0. Okay, now I'm somewhere in the middle. So when I've been in negative for such a long time, the 0 also looks very good for me. But then at 0, there is no happiness there. Yes, I have attained liberation, but there is no happiness there. For me to be happy, I have to go to the positive part. And that's where most of these philosophies, they fall short, right? For example, the Nyaya and the Vaisheshika philosophy, they teach us that we can uncouple the soul, which is me, my true identity, from our mind. So once you uncouple yourself, that's okay. But then what happens after that? There is nothing beyond that. So there is no happiness. Similarly, the Sankhya school, it teaches about that this material world. It just looks at this material world. It's trying to understand its nature, the nature of the soul through this material world. That okay, everything has an origin, everything fades away. That means there has to be some superior power. So they just they start perceiving the duality of subject and the object. So it's eventually what to say is that, but that also there is no ananda in there. So that's why the Vedanta philosophy that's been given to us by Vyasadeva, that is the one that understands that the innate feature of the soul is to be happy, right? So how to get that? Yes, you need to detach yourself from matter, but then you have to go beyond that also. And there is there is some emotional richness, and there is a tangible happiness that you can attain by that, by being by understanding the Vedanta philosophy. So that's a bit of some philosophy there. So most of those are, as I said, even though they believe in the Vedas, they have incomplete knowledge. Only when they come to Vedanta, which has been given to us by Ved Vyas, it gets the complete knowledge. Then again, it's divided into two sections, Advaita and Dvaita. So when we say Advaita means the people who are Advaita followers, they believe their oneness of oneness. They believe in oneness. They are Advaita. They're not dualism. When we die, they say that the soul merges with the Supreme Being and we lose our identity. The Dvaita aspect says that no, we maintain our identity. And that's where we come in. When I say we, means followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We have the philosophy of Achinta Bheda, Bheda Tattva. That we are simultaneously one and different. What that means is that we are one qualitatively. I have the same qualities as Krishna, but in a very, very minimal amount in comparison to Krishna. So I'm same in that aspect, but I'm different because I am a living entity in myself and I never go and merge with Krishna. That's not what we believe in. We believe that Krishna is always there, I am always there, and my job is to serve Krishna. And then wherever I go, in whichever position I am, when I realize my true self, I will understand what my relationship with Krishna is. So that's the Dvaita philosophy. Buddhism, Jainism, Charvaikism, these all are, they don't believe in Vedas. They don't believe in God. There's a purpose behind it. There was a reason behind why Lord Buddha came. Why did he establish, why did he denounce the Vedas? There was a reason behind it. But then we will not talk about that right now. Then, okay, Sampradayas. Sampradaya means lineage. What is our lineage? Our Puranas, we talk about, I just mentioned to you about all the Shruti and Smriti. There are 4 Sampradayas that are coming from Krishna. So we are Vaishnavas. Lord Krishna spoke the knowledge to 4 beings, Brahma, Lakshmi, Shiva, and the 4 Kumaras. And they have, each of them has their own, acharyas who were stalwart leaders, and I have named them. So we have Madhvacharya, who's a follower of Brahma, Ramnujacharya, who's a follower of Lakshmi, Vishnu Swami, and Nimbarkacharya, who's of the 4 Kumaras. So where do we fit in here? Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu comes under the lineage of Madhvacharya. So we are a branch of the Vaishnava philosophy coming through Lord Brahma. We are a branch of that. And then come all the way from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu comes down to Srila Prabhupada, and then that's where we are. We are grandchildren of Srila Prabhupada. So we say Brahma, Madhva, Gaudiya. The word Gaudiya means Gaudadesh. Gaudadesh is Bengal. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu being in Bengal, So we are Brahma, Madhva, Gaudiya, Vaishnavas. That's what our sampradaya is. Right? So that's the disciplic succession. Prabhupada gives this disciplic succession right in the beginning, just after the end of the introduction. He talks of this disciplic succession so that he can establish for everybody that the validity and the authenticity of the message that he's providing, and also his authenticity as a guru, as an acharya. To establish that, he presented this aspect, that the disciplic succession. What do we have next? Okay, so that's the three main aspects that I just wanted to briefly touch upon. Any thoughts, any questions, or anything you want, any comments before I move forward? Okay. Okay, then let's move forward. There are no questions, no thoughts here. Just give me 1 second. Okay, coming to the next aspect, which is setting the scene. Setting the scene. And so when we go to Bhagavad Gita, if you have a Bhagavad Gita around you, please look at it. If you don't, you can open it up on Vedabase and just look at it, so that you have the sections. So the first section that comes in is setting the scene in Bhagavad Gita. And the setting the scene is written by the publisher. Publisher is, at that time when this book was first published, was Macmillan. Okay. After Macmillan, Prabhupada started the ISKCON Press, which later on came to be named as Bhaktivedanta Book Trust. So what the setting the scene tells us is, it describes how Srila Prabhupada's version of Bhagavad Gita is important to us. This version, especially for the Western audience, how important this is for them. So what does the setting the scene does? It gives a historical context of the book. Right, so it tells us, if you go through the setting the scene, it tells us all about Mahabharata, what was going on, the two brothers, and then the Pandavas and the Kauravas, they're fighting, and Arjuna lamenting. So it talks about the historical aspect of the book. So publishers also highlight the fact that why is this particular version important. Publishers mentioned there that most of the versions of Bhagavad Gita that were available, and Prabhupada says that there were nearly 600 versions of Bhagavad Gita at that time when Prabhupada brought out this version. What most of the versions of Bhagavad Gita have done is that they have dethroned Krishna as the main figure of the book. And the reason they have done is to make room for their own concepts and philosophies. Right? That's what most of the versions have done. For them, Krishna becomes sometimes he becomes a poet, sometimes he becomes a mystic, sometimes he becomes a historical figure, whatnot. But nobody mentions, or nobody gives Krishna his position of God, which Prabhupada did. That is why this version is called as it is. Why? Because Prabhupada is establishing Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as Krishna himself says this in Bhagavad Gita at multiple places, and also establishes Bhakti as the main message coming out of Bhagavad Gita, the main message that Krishna wants to give to all of us. So therefore, this particular translation and all the commentaries, the purports that Prabhupada puts there, it actually directs the reader to Krishna instead of taking them away from Krishna, which most of the other versions do. So the Bhagavad Gita then truly becomes it becomes consistent and it becomes comprehensible, because as you would call it, it's called cognitive dissonance, that when you read that, Krishna himself says in the ninth chapter, last verse, that man mana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. What that means is man mana bhava. Man mana bhava, that establish me in your heart. Man mana bhava mad bhakto, become my devotee. Man mana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Pay your obeisances to me. So even though he's always saying it, me, people, what the other versions say, oh no, we're not talking about Krishna, he's not God. We are talking about the God who's sitting in Krishna's heart, who doesn't have a form. So that's how people demean Bhagavad Gita by putting in their own thoughts. But this particular version is completely comprehensible. It's consistent with the message of Bhagavad Gita. Krishna, since Krishna is the speaker of the Gita, and its ultimate goal as well, Krishna is the ultimate goal as well. Bhagavad Gita, as it is, presents this scripture in its true form, in its true terms. That is why this version is the most read version across the world. It is the most widely sold version in the world, just because of the way the message has been given. So that's about the setting the scene. Okay. Then after setting the scene, we come to dedication. Okay. Now, dedication, Prabhupada dedicates this book to Baldev Vidyabhushan, who Prabhupada says in the dedication that Baldev Vidyabhushan wrote the Govinda Bhasya. The Govinda Bhasya is a commentary on Vedanta Sutra. It's a commentary on Bhagavatam, Srimad Bhagavatam. So I'll quickly tell you a story behind it, that why Baldev Vidyabhushan. Okay. So what happened when the Mughals came to India? Some of the Mughals were favorable, or they were not openly denouncing the philosophy, the Vaishnava philosophy. But then there were some of them who were very envious towards the philosophy of the Vaishnavas, deity worship, the elegant temples that we had. So one of them was Aurangzeb. Okay, when Aurangzeb came to India, he was really very envious, and he ordered that all the temples in Vrindavan should be destroyed. When he said that, now what the Gaudiya, by the time when Aurangzeb came, Gaudiya Vaishnavism had established Radha Krishna as the supreme Godhead, and they had many temples there in Vrindavan. But then when Aurangzeb said, destroy all the temples, all the deities in these temples were transported to Rajasthan, to King, they were King Jai Singh. There was their king at Jai Singh. And why Rajasthan? Because the Rajputs, Jai Singh and the other Rajput leaders in Rajasthan, they were in a very unique position. They had an alliance with the Mughals, and Mughals had to have an alliance with the Rajputs because Rajputs were very strong in their position. So they had an alliance with the Mughals, but then they were very favorable of Radha and Krishna, of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas also. So then that becomes a very good position that, okay, you take them to Rajasthan, Mughals won't attack there, so let's establish the temples there. So the deities were taken from Vrindavan to Rajasthan and established there. And as a quirk of fate, what happens at that moment, at the same time, the Ramanujacharya followers, who again are a part of an established Vaishnava Sampradaya, they were establishing themselves in Rajasthan. They were primarily from the south. They were establishing themselves in the north of India. They established themselves in Rajasthan by the help of King Jai Singh's wife, who became a follower of the Ramanujacharya philosophy. And they set up a temple of Lord Rama and Mother Sita there, and not just one, many temples. And when they saw that Radha and Krishna have come to Rajasthan, they suddenly felt a bit of a political, they found themselves in a political mess there. They're political, theological, whatever you may call it. And they felt a bit oppressed, and they felt a bit envious of this. So what they did was, they, through the queen, they instigated the king by saying that, these Gaudiya Vaishnavas, they don't come from a bona fide sampradaya. So they cannot have temples in Rajasthan. That was one thing they said. But then worse than that was, what they said was, because Radha and Krishna never married, you cannot have Radharani on the altar with Krishna. So they forced the Gaudiya Vaishnava temples to remove Radharani from the altar. So when this all happened, those Ramanandis, they were called Ramanandis, followers of Ramanujacharya, and Sri Lakshmi Sampradaya. So they said, we want to talk, we need answers to these questions, or all the Gaudiya Vaishnava temples should be closed. First of all, you don't have a commentary on Vedanta, on Srimad Bhagavatam, which every Sampradaya has. You don't have it, so you're not a valid bona fide Sampradaya. Mahaprabhu didn't comment on it because Mahaprabhu, Srimad Bhagavatam was itself a valid Shastra, and he didn't want to comment on it any further. For him, that was it. And they said that Sri Chaitanya, what's that? Srimad Bhagavatam Amalam Param Amalam Pramanam Pumarthu Mahan. Yes, so Amalam Pramanam Pumarthu Mahan. That it is the purest of all the philosophies, and it's Pumarthu Mahan, and it's supposedly Krishna himself. So that's what Mahaprabhu taught everybody, and so we didn't need a version of or a commentary on that. But then all the other sampradayas, the Ramanandis, they were saying that you need a commentary on that to be a bona fide sampradaya. And then second thing was they commented on Radha and Krishna's marriage. So those are the two contentious points they brought forth, and they told the king to close all the temples. That's where Baldev Vidyabhushan comes into picture. Baldev Vidyabhushan was sent by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, who's in our lineage, he's an acharya. Baldev Vidyabhushan was sent to Rajasthan to be a part of that debate where all the questions were being asked to the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. So then the obvious questions came in that you don't have a commentary, and then what he said that, okay, I will present a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, on Bhagavatam. And that's what he did. He went and prayed to Lord Govindaji, that was one of the deities of the temple in Rajasthan. And then he said, and then Lord Govindaji came to him in his dream, and he said, don't worry, I will guide you how to write. And that's what then he wrote. Within a couple of months, he wrote a commentary on it and he presented it. And the Ramanandis couldn't refute any of the claims made in that, and they were defeated. That's how Baldev Vidyabhushan established the authenticity, the validity, and the respectability of Gaudiya Vaishnavism in Rajasthan. That is why, so Baldev Vidyabhushan is a fighter, he's a warrior, and he's a respectable acharya for us. That is why, and Prabhupada also being a warrior and a fighter, and you're establishing Krishna consciousness across the world. So it's more like one warrior, appreciating the hard work of another warrior. So Prabhupada, that is why he is offering his appreciation and obeisances to Baldev Vidyabhushan by dedicating the Bhagavad Gita to him. So that's where the dedication comes in. So the long story behind it. I just gave a short snap of it, but there's a long story, much more details that I just skipped. So that's the dedication. Okay, then coming to the preface. The preface was something that Prabhupada wrote. The preface was not in the first publication of the book. So when the first book came out, when the first version of Bhagavad Gita came out, they had to cut down many pages. There was a limitation of how many pages the book can have. And there is also a short story behind that. What happened that when Prabhupada was very eager to publish this book, publish the Bhagavad Gita. In India, Prabhupada was known as an author, very well known as an author. He had published, he has sent Srimad Bhagavatam to government libraries, presented it to many dignitaries, the Prime Minister, the President, ministers. So he was well established. So for him to publish a version of Bhagavad Gita in India would not be hard. But in the United States, his disciples were new, they were not influential, they were not connected to anybody. They had sincerity, but there was not much of social compatibility there. So Prabhupada didn't have anybody. So in US, he wanted to publish his books. But not being known, nobody was interested in publishing his book. So what happened that there was this musical record that had been recorded. Record has been recorded. Some songs in there, some kirtan had been recorded, and one of the clerks in the Macmillan Publishing House had requested for that record. They were about to mail it, but then Prabhupada told Brahmananda Prabhu, who was one of his first disciples, early disciple, I think he was the fourth or fifth disciple, Prabhupada told him to no, you go and take it personally, take it to Macmillan personally and give it to that person. And Prabhupada was fully confident that Macmillan will publish this Bhagavad Gita. And that itself was a big surprise for Brahmananda Prabhu, because he had been running from pillar to pillar to get that book published, and nearly every publishing house had refused to publish the Bhagavad Gita. So when he came to Macmillan and he found the person who had asked for that record, he was a bit disappointed. When I say he, Brahmananda Prabhu was a bit disappointed, because that person was just a mere clerk in the publishing house. So Brahmananda Prabhu thought, okay, he's not an influential person here and he'll not be able to help me. But while Brahmananda Prabhu was talking to that clerk, the editor, the chief editor of that Macmillan house, came there. And he saw Brahmananda Prabhu. He was dressed as a sannyasi, not sannyasi. Was sannyasi? Yeah. I'm not sure, but he was dressed more in a Vaishnava attire. And Prabhupada, sorry, not Prabhupada, the editor immediately turned to him. He says, "Are you, do you know, are you like a follower of a guru?" And he said, "Yes, my guru has come from India, and he's teaching the philosophy of Eastern philosophy here." So then the editor said that we are expanding our theological library. So we have a version of Bible, we have a version of Quran, the Torah, we have all these, but we don't have a Bhagavad Gita version. So has your guru written a version of Bhagavad Gita? Now that was a miracle, right? Just imagine that Brahmananda Prabhu has been running pillar to pillar and nuke to corner to get that published. Nobody's been accepting it. And suddenly here's an editor who's personally coming and asking him. So the Brahmananda Prabhu said, yes, I have a version. And then that's how the version came into being. So the first version was with Macmillan. But then as Prabhupada himself says in the preface, that originally he wrote it in a much detailed part, as the version that we see today is, the yellow version. But then initially it was cut down to a limited number of pages, so he had to cut down many things out of it, which Prabhupada was not very appreciative of. But just to get the ball, just to get it running, get the ball rolling, he put this, he let them publish it. There was this famous musician at that time, I don't know if you call him a musician, but he was Allen Ginsberg. He wrote a foreword, and books demand increased, Bhagavad Gita's book demand increased. And with the fame coming in, Prabhupada thought of publishing Bhagavad Gita through the ISKCON Press, which later on was called Bhakti-Vedanta Book Trust. So now if you see, practically every book that Prabhupada has written is published by Bhakti-Vedanta Book Trust. So this preface was not there in the Macmillan publication. And then further on, Prabhupada talks in the preface that there were a lot of intelligent people who are accepting the Bhagavad Gita. A lot of the parents of his disciples had appreciated the work Prabhupada has done of converting those hippies into devotees. And Prabhupada was very humble. He says that his success is due to his following his guru's order, right? And then one has to understand the central point of Bhagavad Gita. And what the central point that Prabhupada is establishing is that we are a part of Krishna and our goal is to serve him. So towards the end of the preface, Prabhupada says that even if a single person becomes a devotee, the attempt that Prabhupada has put in will be successful. So this is Srila Prabhupada's goal. He's not looking for fame. He's not writing to become a popular author. His goal is to convert people to devotion, to become pure devotees of Krishna. That's what the preface talks about. Okay, so those were some of the points that have been brought out in the preface. Okay, introduction. Now, introduction is a pretty long one for the book. Nearly 25 or so pages in the the paperback version. And so what Prabhupada is doing, and I'll walk you through the introduction and what all Prabhupada is covering in there. So Prabhupada starts with the famous prayers, right? We all do that, where it's offering prayers to Rupa Goswami and then offering prayers to Radharani, to Krishna. So introduction is the only place in the entire Bhagavad Gita where Srila Prabhupada refers to Radharani. That's in the prayers only. After this, he doesn't refer to Radharani anywhere. If you search for the name Radharani, it'll show up 3 times only in the introduction section, and that too also in just the prayer section. He doesn't refer to Radharani anywhere else. After offering prayers, he talks about the devotional mood in which to read the Bhagavad Gita. That's the mood in which we are supposed to accept it. Right? So this book is supposedly taken as a manual. It's taken as a prescription, and the potency of a prescription is only valid when it is followed. And that's what Prabhupada is establishing for us, that we need to have a devotional mood to understand Bhagavad Gita. Then only the potency of Bhagavad Gita will establish within our hearts. If a doctor has told us to take a tablet 3 times a day, we just simply follow that. We don't try to misinterpret the prescription. Right? So Srila Prabhupada presents the Bhagavad Gita according to the prescription which has been authentically given in Bhagavad Gita. That is why, again, he calls it as it is. Because Bhagavad Gita's essential point is Bhakti, and Prabhupada establishes that thoroughly. That is why it is as it is. No adulteration, no mixing. Then Prabhupada quotes it's from the 4th chapter, right? It's 4th chapter. He says there's a verse where it's Bhakto Sime Sakha Cheti. But the reason Krishna spoke this book to Arjun was because Arjun is a Sakha, Bhakto Sime Sakha Cheti. He's a Bhakta, he's submissive, and he's a close friend of Krishna. So a submissive spirit. Without that submissive spirit, it's practically impossible to understand Bhagavad Gita. Because Bhagavad Gita is a great mystery. I just told you there are 600 versions of it, all of them interpreting Bhagavad Gita in their own ways. Just imagine how much delusion it can create there. Sorry, even not delusion, illusion. Illusion to the person who is writing the Bhagavad Gita, delusion for others. So without that mood of devotion, the import of Bhagavad Gita is lost. Yes, Ashish Prabhu, please.
Very quick question. I mean, yes, there are alter motives based on which these different versions may have come out, as you explained. But from a let's say language interpreter's perspective, pure professors, if they are very well versed in Sanskrit language, if they read it, wouldn't it sound like exactly as an English words or a Hindi words, and wouldn't the meaning clearly come out that way? I mean, why such a great deal of interpretation has to be done if one understands the language is my question.
Yes, that's a good question, Prabhu. So one thing to understand here, Prabhu, is that Sanskrit is a very complex language. Not every single word that we have in Sanskrit has an English meaning to it. Okay. For example, if you see Sharnagati, there's a word Sharnagati that comes very often in Bhagavatam. Now, if you look at Sharnagati, if somebody transfers into English, he'll say surrender. That's the closest word that it comes to. Now, surrender has a very negative connotation when you come to the English language. But Sharnagati is more of a submissive attitude. So that submissive attitude, so that can only be given by a person who actually has a heartfelt connection with Bhagavad Gita, who understands the speaker, who understands Krishna himself. Right? I might be doing my PhD in Bhagavad Gita. There are many people who have done PhDs in Bhagavad Gita, not just Bhagavad Gita. So many things written by Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami books, Srimad Bhagavatam. But then, just because they don't have a heartfelt connection with it, they are not coming through a disciplic succession where the Guru has shared his or her realizations with the disciples. And then, because of that disconnect, the interpretations are always incomplete. Right? That's something we have to understand. Furthermore, people have ulterior motives. Because of that, you can misinterpret. I just gave you one example. Man mana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Krishna is very clearly telling us, pay your obeisances to me, worship me, become my devotee. Now, how hard is to interpret that? But then somebody as elite as Sarvapalli Radhakrishna, who was a president of India, a very highly educated person, he writes a version of Bhagavad Gita where he says, you're not talking about Krishna. You're not supposed to pay your obeisances to Krishna. You're supposed to pay your obeisances to the amorphous living being in the heart of Krishna. Based on the contamination in my heart, the version, the way it's interpreted, can be completely different. I'll pause here to see if you have further questions, or was that satisfactory enough?
No, absolutely, Prabhuji. That answers my question. What you're saying is, I mean, one, the Sanskrit language itself is complex, and number
Yeah.
two, depending on the context in which you start interpreting it, the whole interpretation might be biased because of your subconscious biases and all those things. Yep, makes sense.
And it happens in all the books. All these scriptures, they will give you whatever you want to extract out of it, because they're coming from Krishna himself. I just mentioned to you, the Bhagavad Gita, when we read it, you'll see it talks of Jnana Yoga, it talks of Karma Yoga, it talks of Bhakti Yoga. People who want to say that, oh, Krishna only talks of Karma Yoga. In India, I don't know, might be millions of people who say, oh, I know what Bhagavad Gita is about. Bhagavad Gita say, do your karma and live your life happily. That's Bhagavad. But Krishna never says that anywhere in the entire Bhagavad Gita. So also, according to our conditioning, what my conditioning is, what my level of intellectual contamination is, the way accordingly I will interpret the Bhagavad Gita. My wife, she was coming from India recently, and she met this lady on the airplane, and that lady was reading a version of there was this IITian, probably he's a well-renowned guy, I'm presuming, because she was telling me that she googled him up and found that he had many followers, but all he had written in that book was just some gibberish, throwing around fancy language without giving any sensible conclusions, without giving a practical way how I can uplift myself. You just talk about fancy language, right? Yamimam pushpitam vacham. That's what people do. Pushpitam vacham. They get attracted to the flowery language of the books, and they present it, and they think, oh, I am a scholar, I know everything. That it doesn't work that way. It's a transcendental, it's a mystical process. Prabhupada himself, he'd been practicing for 40 years this principle of Bhagavad Gita, establishing it in his life. After that, he got to write a Bhagavad Gita version, right? And because he had fully imbibed the message, he had fully transformed his own heart by reading that philosophy, was he able to present it to millions and billions of people. Nobody in the entire history at the age of 70 has done that kind of a magic. He came in there was this one volume of Time magazine, people over the age of 70 who had done wonders. Prabhupada was a part of that. Nobody else has done that because of he was presenting the Bhagavad Gita authentically as Krishna wanted to it. And that's why he got such unlimited success. So there's a lot that goes into it, Prabhu. It's not just a philosophical aspect that, oh yeah, I will translate the words from Sanskrit to English and then that's the version that it's supposed to be. No, there's a lot of that goes on beyond that, a lot of mysticism that goes on, that you have to have gone through that immense penance and austerity to come to that level that you could actually write a scripture or translate a scripture, actually, not write it. So
absolutely. Yeah, completely makes sense. And especially, I mean, it's not one or two verses we're talking about. It's 700 verses.
700 verses, yes. And you will notice is when we go through, that's the beauty of Prabhupada, what he has done. He will give you the meaning, he'll give you the essence, what Krishna is trying to say that there. And you can easily see how that fits into the flow of the book, how that the essence is so well established. And then Prabhupada doesn't talk just about Bhagavad Gita. When you'll go through it, he'll refer to Puranas, he'll refer to Upanishads, he will refer to Samhita, Brahma Samhita, he will refer to Srimad Bhagavatam. And he just compiles everything and presents such a concrete evidence that is practically impossible to say no to it. And so you will see that as we go forward. So yeah, the mystical process there.
Yeah, thank you, Prabhuji. I'm getting goosebumps now. I'm just excited.
Thank you. Anything else anybody has in their mind? Otherwise, I can jump on further in the introduction. No? Okay. Let's move forward then. So yes, so that was the first thing. You have to have a submissive spirit to understand Bhagavad Gita. And we just discussed that. Without the submissive spirit, you can come to the conclusion that Bhagavad Gita talks of Jnana Yoga. So I should become a Jnani Yogi. Even when it's mentioned in the Shastras, when Lord Brahma, so actually I talked about Shruti and Smriti, right? So Shruti is spoken by Krishna, right? So when Krishna gave the knowledge of the Vedas to Brahma, when Brahma read it the first time, he thought it's talking about Jnana Yoga. The second time he read it, he thought about it's about karma yoga. When he read it the third time, then he understood it's about bhakti. So if the topmost being in this creation has to go through 3 cycles of reading and then understands what the Shastras are about, how can a person like me who has no knowledge, practically full of contamination, and my heart is so full of these sins and vices, can understand this pure literature? So we need to be submissive to a guru to understand it. So that's where Prabhupada comes in, and he is merciful on us. So yes, so that's submissive spirit. We talked about that. Then coming to the purpose of the Bhagavad Gita, after setting the mood, Prabhupada is establishing the purpose. And he says that the purpose is to deliver mankind from the nescience of material existence. So what does nescience mean? All that misery that we are going through. And what's the worst part? We talked about it in Nectar of Instruction, that we are in ignorance that I'm in misery. I don't even realize that. Right? We talked of individual and collective ignorance there. So that's the individual ignorance, that I don't even know I'm in misery. There is a story in where's that? I don't remember. Yes, there's a story. I'm not sure the origin, but what happens once that Indra, he offends his guru. His guru is Brahaspati. Yes. And when he offends him, he's cursed to come down on this planet Earth as a pig. Okay, so he comes to this planet Earth and as a pig. He has his family, hundreds of piglets. Back up in heavenly planet, now no king is there. Indra is the king of the heavenly planets. Brahma is now a bit concerned there. Now, okay, it's too much of me for me to handle everything. Where is this Indra? So he comes to Earth, Brahma, and he tells him, oh, what are you doing? You're living in this mud and stool, and unnecessarily just procreating the whole time. You are Indra. And the pig says, get lost. What are you talking about? I'm enjoying my life. My life is so wonderful. I have my family, my wife. Look at my wife, so beautiful. Look at my kids. I have so much to eat. And Brahma said, oh my God, your ignorance is beyond compare. I need to do something. So first thing what he does is he kills all his children. And the pig goes wild. The Indra pig goes wild. And he says, why the hell did you do that? You killed all my children. But still he's attached because he still has his wife living. And he says, oh, there can be more children. So Indra said, oh my God, his ignorance is so much. So then he kills his wife. And now that pig comes out of his ignorance and misery. He says, oh my God. And then he realizes. And then even after all that, he doesn't fully acknowledge it. Then Indra has to kill him also and then take him back. So that's the extent of misery that we are going through, the ignorance that we are suffering from. And that's what Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada establishing the purpose is to pull us out of that ignorance of material existence, right? And Prabhupada gives an analogy in that there is a tigress of nescience that is actually swallowing us. Prabhupada gives an analogy of a tigress, right? But then Krishna is very merciful on us, especially on human beings. So what this analogy of the tigress indicates is that we have forgotten our spiritual identity. Right, that's the analogy. What the analogy of the tigress means. And then Prabhupada, once he has established the mood and the purpose, then he's talked about the conditioned nature that we are in. Then that's the purpose of Bhagavad Gita. He talks about there are 5 basic truths that have been established in Bhagavad Gita, and that's coming from Baldev Vidyabhushan's commentary on Bhagavad Gita, which is called Gita Bhushana. So Prabhupada is bringing in from there, and what he's establishing there is there are 5 concepts that have been talked about, 5 basic truths. What are those 5 basic truths? Ishwar, that is Krishna. Jiva, living entity, that's me. Prakriti, that's material nature. Karma, so when we act under Prakriti for some desire, karma comes into being. So that's the fruitive activity. Karma is fruitive activity. And the last is Kal, that's time. Okay. Those are the 5 concepts that have been discussed in the Bhagavad Gita. So if anybody asks you what does Bhagavad Gita talk about? Ishvara, Jiva, Prakriti, Karma, Kala. Okay, those 5 things. Out of these 5 things, 4 things are eternal. Ishvara is eternal. Jiva, for sure eternal. Prakriti, the material nature, is also eternal. Now, why is it eternal? It's eternal because whenever, so there's a cycle that keeps going. Everything is created and it's annihilated, then it's created again. But then, even though Prakriti might not be manifest, but still it remains. So there's just a manifestation and unmanifestation, appearance, disappearance. But that doesn't mean that it's completely gone away. It's still there, might not be manifested. So that's why Prakriti is also eternal. The only thing not eternal out of those 5 concepts is karma. Right? So what that means is that karma can be completely removed. So for example, as we do our karma, there is the after effects that I have to suffer because of those karma. But then when we come to bhakti, Krishna can remove all our karmas completely. That's the power that Krishna has, because everything is coming from him. So he can remove all our karma, right? So that way karma can be nullified. That is why karma is temporary. So all out of those 5 concepts of Ishwar, Jiva, Prakriti, Kal and karma, only karma is temporary. That's what Prabhupada talks about in the introduction. Then Prabhupada talks about consciousness. What is consciousness? Right? And then Prabhupada established this phrase that we are conditional living entities. So what does the word conditional mean? Conditional means that we might have heard the word condition, right? Many times this word is used, that conditions apply. You saw that. So Prabhupada used the word condition in the context that the soul's happiness is dependent on so many conditions that are not under our control. That is why we are conditional. So if for example, if you want to enjoy an object, we need a good body. For example, let's say, I want to eat a good dish. I should have a good body. My body should be conducive for that, for me to intake of that dish and also digest it. So that's the first aspect. The dish should be available. Somebody should have made that dish for me to enjoy it. So the object has to be there. The conditions have to be appropriate for my enjoyment. Now, let's say I like a specific dish, and you have to serve it in a particular bowl or in a particular container. You cannot just, let's say, I'll spread it on the table and you can eat it. No, the conditions also have to be appropriate for my enjoyment. And even after all that, let's presume all of that is available. My body's capacity is limited. How much can I eat in one time, one sitting? So because of all that, there are so many conditions that apply. Prabhupada says that it's a conditional living. We are conditional living entities, right? So, and then so that's one aspect, that we are conditional. The next aspect is that we have a consciousness, right? We are conscious beings. We are sentient beings. But then that consciousness is contaminated. And why is it contaminated? Because I want to be the controller. So I want to control things myself. And as all of you are grown-up adults, you all know for sure that I'm not in control. There are billions of things that are not under my control. Practically, there are so many things going on in my body that are not under my control. My heart that's beating. Whenever I eat food, automatically there are so many enzymes and acids that are secreted. My food is digested automatically. The food is converted to blood and protein, nutrition, transported to all my different organs, my hand, my brain, all out of my control. But still, because my consciousness is contaminated, I think I am the controller. And even worse, I want to be the controller. That's what Prabhupada is establishing right in the introduction. Okay. Then, so Prabhupada is giving all the philosophy in a nutshell in introduction. And you will notice that as we go through Bhagavad Gita, you can practically read one purport of Prabhupada, and that will give you a very good understanding of what the Bhagavad Gita is about. The reason Prabhupada did this, because he knew that in Kali Yuga, we are so distracted, we are so much in a agitated mindset that we don't want to spend time on spiritual matters. So Prabhupada said, okay, even if you read one page of the book, you will get a benefit out of it. You just read the introduction, you'll get benefit out of it. So Prabhupada made it so easy for everybody to imbibe the philosophy. That's why he condenses everything in there. He gives the example of the stomach and hand there. That the example means that when you feed the stomach, everything is automatically nourished. So similarly, if we understand that Krishna is a supreme personality of Godhead, all the other miseries that we are going through, they will automatically be nullified and taken account of. Okay, so he gives the examples of that. So that's one. Those are some important aspects that come in. Then Prabhupada says that we have a complete facility to realize Krishna, to realize the absolute truth. So what it means is that on this planet Earth, we have been, and planet Earth as well as in this body, we have been given a complete facility for understanding Krishna, understanding my goal of life, and where do I need to go, what is my destination, everything. But then we don't have an understanding of that goal of human life. That is why all my knowledge is incomplete. Prabhupada explains that. Right? He talks about Sanatan Dharma. So Sanatan Dharma, so let's take a slight detour here and understand what Sanatan Dharma is. Anybody has a thought, understanding of what Sanatan Dharma is? What does it mean? Okay. So Sanatan Dharma, basically what it means, if you just translate it into English, Sanatan means eternal, Dharma means my constitutional position, right? So Dharma is something that is not changeable. That's again going back to what we were discussing when I was talking to Ashish Prabhu, that when you translate the word Dharma to English, the contemporary kind of word in English would be faith. But faith can change. I am a Hindu let's say I'm a Hindu by faith. I can easily change my faith. I can become a Muslim. A Muslim can become a Christian. Christian can become a Jew. So the word faith, and similarly religion. Religion, again, you can change your religion. Right? So the concept of religion conveys the idea of faith, and the faith can always change. But that's not the meaning of dharma. Dharma is intrinsic and not changeable. For instance, liquidity cannot be taken away from water, sweetness cannot be taken away from sugar, and heat cannot be taken away from fire. So the Sanatan Dharma of fire is heat, the Sanatan Dharma of water is to be a liquid, Sanatan Dharma of sugar is to be sweet, and nobody can change that. So that goes back to what is my Sanatan Dharma, what is my universal truth, what is my intrinsic nature that cannot be changed. And that's what Bhagavad Gita will establish for us. And there is this concept of Hinduism that comes in. Everybody says, I always get a bit uncomfortable when somebody asks me, are you a Hindu? And then I take them through a walk and tell them how Hinduism is not a word mentioned in any of our scriptures. There's no mention of the word Hindu. Krishna doesn't talk about it. Bhagavatam, Puranas, Shruti, Smriti, nobody talks about Hinduism. The Hinduism word, first of all, what's the origin of the word Hindu? When people would come to India, they had to come through the northern part, right? The northern part, you're talking about Russia, the current Russia, Pakistan, Iran, Iraq. That's where people used to come to India through the road route. They had to cross a river called Sindhu. Okay, and then the Sindhu River, or in English you can call it River Indus. So people coming. So when you talk of these people, the Persians pronounce Sindhu as Hindu. So that's how the word Hindu came into being. Okay, but even at that moment, the word Hindu was not associated with the religion. Right? The Hindu was more of the people living across this river, the land beyond the river, their way of life, right? So, and in the past, the word Hinduism, the word Hindu, and later on, it became, when the Greeks came to know about it, became Indus. That's where the word India comes from. Okay, Kish? That's where the word India comes from. So, so that's what it meant at that moment, the people living across that river. But then later Hindu word came to have a very distinctly religious meaning. as an adherent of Hinduism. And it displays completely the earlier geographical, ethnic, cultural meaning, which was very broad, right? It could encompass members of other religions, some of them which are now called as Jainism, Buddhism, but earlier on, those could be easily come under the umbrella of Hinduism because it was talking about people living across that river. It was not meant to identify a religion. So that's why Hinduism is more of a way of life, and that favors the lived experience of the way of living, the Sanatan Dharma, the eternal religion, right? So that's what Sanatan Dharma means. So that's what we all are. We are Sanatan Dharmis. We're not Hindus, because Hinduism, first of all, it's not a word that comes into any of the scriptures, and secondly, it's meant to be identified. It was meant to identify a geographical region, and it had a cultural meaning, not a religious meaning. It didn't mean about a sect of people, and that's why we are Sanatan Dharmis. So we have an eternal religion. Jivera Sarup Hoy Nitya Krishna Das. That is our eternal religion. To be a servant of Krishna. Then once again, the word servant has a very negative connotation in English. It's a submission out of love to Krishna that we are offering to Krishna. That's what it is. It's not servant is a negative word. That's what Prabhupada tells us, that Sanatan Dharma. So we are Sanatan Dharma. And then Prabhupada talks about throughout the introduction, Prabhupada quotes extensively Bhagavad Gita verses. I'm not going to touch upon them because we'll read about them later on. So he talks about Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu Ma Manusmrana Yuddhacha, that always remember Krishna and do our duties. And how is that possible? Prabhupada gives the example, a very strong example Prabhupada gives in there, that if there's a married couple, right? So if a married woman is attached to another man, not her husband, then the attachment is supposed to be considered to be very strong, because now you already have a person in your family, your husband, but then you are even going beyond that despite that you have an attachment to somebody else, and that attachment is considered very strong, right? So you're thinking about your loved one. So and that lady, when that lady is thinking about that paramour, she does her household chores very, very efficiently to not create any suspicion in anybody's heart about her attachment to that other person. So Prabhupada is giving this strong message that this is the way we should work in our life, that our hands are at work, but our mind is always thinking about Krishna. Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu Ma Manusmrana Yuddhacha. That's what the way Prabhupada is mentioned in the introduction. Prabhupada brings about absorption in Krishna. That's what he's talking about. We talked about absorption in Nectar of Instruction, the 5 Swarna Dasha, we talked about it, and that had recollection, memorization, absorption, different aspects. So that's what he's talking about. And then Prabhupada ends by giving verses from Gita Mahatmya. Gita Mahatmya is coming from Padma Puran, and it glorifies the Bhagavad Gita. Okay? And the last verse of Gita Mahatmya is a very important verse. Eko Devo Devaki Putra Eva, Eko Shastra Devaki Putra Gitam, Eko Devo Devaki Putra Eva, Eko Shastra Devaki Putra Gitam, Eko Mantra Tasya Namani Yani. That only one mantra, that is the Hare Krishna mantra. So that's spoken by Lord Shiva. He's talking to Mother Parvati. And so he's establishing the glories of Bhagavad Gita, and he's saying that everybody is looking for one religion. Here it is. Service to God, service out of love, submission out of love. Right? So this is how Prabhupada sets our devotional mood to study Bhagavad Gita. That's why I just wanted to go through this, so that when we set into Bhagavad Gita, we understand that it's the mood of devotion that will open up the book for us, not a mood with which, I want to memorize the Bhagavad Gita, I will understand it thoroughly, or I have some ulterior motives at heart. Now we will not be able to understand the essence of Bhagavad Gita by that. Right? So Prabhupada took us through all that: devotional mood, purpose, the 5 tattvas, karma, how people should do karma, talks about Sanatan Dharma, and then glories of Bhagavad Gita. So Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita has become by far the most widely read and distributed in Bhagavad Gita in English language. It has become an essential version in reaching out to the wider world, representing the vast tradition that it has, that Prabhupada is presenting to us. That's where we end the introduction. Any questions? I think I have one more slide after this. Any thoughts? Any comments? Anything that you don't agree with that I said? No? Okay. So the last thing, I think I have another slide. Okay, I just wanted to briefly touch upon this. Just a fun fact here. There are different voices in Bhagavad Gita. There are 700 verses in Bhagavad Gita in total. Krishna speaks, obviously, most of them, 575 verses. 83 are talked by Arjuna, and just a few chapters of them, not a lot of them. Sanjaya plays a major role in Bhagavad Gita. Sanjaya was given Divya Chakshu, which means he had given a vision that he could see what was happening in the battlefield, and he spoke the Bhagavad Gita, and he was explaining, he was telling this to Dhritarashtra. And Dhritarashtra spoke one verse in the entire Bhagavad Gita. The first verse of Bhagavad Gita is spoken by Dhritarashtra. Dharma Kshetre Kurukshetre Samaveta Yudhsava Mamaka Pandavaschaiva Kim Apurvata Sanjaya. First verse of Bhagavad Gita. So that's what it is. The different names. Arjuna has 20 other names given in Bhagavad Gita, and they indicate the nature of reciprocation, relation to Krishna, relation to the other. Many times he's called a Kaunteya, son of Kunti. Many times Krishna calls him by names to motivate him. He calls him in the 18th chapter. There's a verse, 5th verse, where Krishna calls him Purusha Vyagra, means tiger among men. So he calls him that. Krishna himself has 33 other names in Bhagavad Gita. Janardana, Madhava, so many names. And accordingly, the names have a purpose behind it, and we'll go through them. That why in this specific verse Krishna is being called by this name, or why Krishna is addressing Arjuna by a different name. So this is the last slide here. Okay. So yes, so that's the whole initial part of Bhagavad Gita, the important aspects. Many times, even I forget, I don't pay attention to them. I say, well, let's read the Bhagavad Gita, but those aspects are really important, right? And in general, there are many reasons why Bhagavad Gita was spoken on the battlefield, right? Krishna wanted to establish the importance of the message. He wanted to establish that violence is the last thing to go back to employ in any condition. But then he doesn't refute that. He said, oh yeah, we cannot use violence, and that completely is antagonistic to what Mahatma Gandhi propagated. That as if Krishna is presenting non-violence. Krishna is not presenting non-violence, but Krishna is telling us that violence should be the last resort. But he's not saying that, oh, become pacifists, become naive, become a carpet, let people walk over you. No, Krishna is not talking about all that. And we will go that in detail there about that. But then that's not the message of Krishna, of Bhagavad Gita. The contents are very lofty, very philosophical, but Krishna's mood is very affectionate and intimate, right? So Krishna is mixing very nicely the philosophical aspects and also his loving propensity towards the living entities in Bhagavad Gita. And if you ask me, Bhagavad Gita is not a book about war, it's not a book about yoga, it's a book about love. It's a love that is conscientious, it's duty bound, and a commitment driven love. That's what the love Bhagavad Gita is talking about. Love is not in this material world, we are always looking for people to love, but then we understand that the love is not a horizontal connection. Then only truly we can understand what love is. Love is a triangular relationship with Krishna at the apex of it. When I see every living entity being a part and parcel of Krishna, there is no way I can be envious of anybody else. There's no way I can be angry of anybody else. And thence the true manifestation of love happens. So that's my 2 cents around Bhagavad Gita. That's the base of book of love. And Bhagavad Gita establishes Krishna's supremacy. It It also talks of other paths, Jnana, Bhakti, Karma. It's an integrated presentation, but then while talking of other parts, it establishes the supremacy of Bhakti. Okay. That's all I have today for discussion. We still have 15 minutes. Anything that anybody wants to talk about, questions, comments? Okay, if nothing more, next week we will have our exam. So hope you are having a good time preparing for that.